Um, my name is Magica for our purposes today. And this is another exciting episode in our series of lectures, which had a title, but I don't remember what it was. I'll find out when I make the thumbnail for this video. Anyways, so these past few months, in fact, the past year and some, I'm making tea, by the way, for the audience at home. I have been struck with a bit of an interesting moment. Now, I'm not going to get into everything that happened. Like you guys at home need to know, your pretty little head, is that I've come up with a formulation of things which will hopefully entice you. This thing, for me, I call it God Machine, and I define it as a loose faith and a loose worldview. Now, before we really get into things, does anyone here have any questions? And better than that, would they like to introduce themselves?
I'm Urkoi. I don't have any questions, I don't think.
Okay.
I am here, though.
Let's see. Next person in the order on Discord. I am on my phone, so I can't see it.
I am called Mollusk or Snail, also Boogie Chills right now, my Discord nickname on the server that we're talking in. My only question, I guess, would be how do we define what God Machine is as a concept? Is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? If you saw it as a worldview, I think that would be a very broad interpretation. So
that's true. That is true. And to that question, I will say that it's currently not 1,000% complete. I would consider it to be in beta form, but the simplest answer would be that it is all of the above. But primarily, I'll say that it is an in-progress religion of sorts, because religion, after all, for most of human history, was the dense entanglement of philosophy, politics, spirituality, and culture. So, in much the same way, this could be said to be one of those, just in a looser sense than we're used to. Next person. Let's see.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Candace.
Hi.
Yeah. Who is God Machine?
That's an excellent question. The real answer is everyone you've ever heard is God Machine, but also none of them, but kind of all of them, and so are you and I. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. And then I believe there's only one more person here.
Yes, hello. I'm Dragon, aka Pascal's Bookie. Questions to start off with. Obviously, you can ignore this if this is going to be a greater part of the lecture, but if you could just sort of briefly summarize what you think the sort of like day-to-day practical uses of God Machine could be in an ideal scenario.
Okay. What solution am I offering, and what problem is the issue? Got it. Well, I would say that in this case, it's sort of a matter of effectivity. I feel that religion and religious thought is a natural occurrence in people. I think people, especially these days, treat everything like religion simply by accident. It's just something in the way we're wired. We just seem to make it happen all the time. And while we may not have spiritual reverence for everything, we tend to follow the patterns of various religious communities. If you've ever read fan fiction, congratulations, you've read Star Wars or My Little Pony Apocrypha. How do you feel? Right? So in this way, I would say that one problem the God Machine identifies is that the various religions are limited both by the time and the context in which they were created. And thus, nowadays, with everything being much more connected, these various schools of thought being available to most people. I think that it is prudent, right? That if we want to if we identify this trait within ourselves towards religious thought, then what that means is that there's two things that can be done with that information. You can either manipulate it towards ends of selfishness, or you can manipulate it towards ends of altruistness. That it's there at all means that these two paths are what's available. You can also ignore it, I suppose, but good luck with that, because it extends to everything beyond just spirituality. It's in everything that we think about, necessarily. Hence, right, the point of God Machine is to both try to offer a broader meta context within which all of these different religious ideas can coexist in at least some fashion, and at the same time, it kind of wants to create its own new sort of branch of thinking, if for no other purpose than to, as I said, at least take advantage of this trait within ourselves for the common good, rather than for my personal enrichment, or your personal enrichment, or someone else's personal enrichment. So, in one sense, it could be a uniter between different people. In another sense, it can be a worldview to better understand different religions, offer a sort of religious literacy that isn't generally available to most people. And then finally, it's kind of fun to think about God and shit. There's a reason we've done it for thousands of years. It's cool. Any other questions? No. Okay.
There was also one other person here. I don't know if he's got his
Oh, is there?
on. It's Eden.
Yeah, Eden.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Eden. Where do I find the goblets?
Where did... The goblets can only be found within the grotto. Unfortunately, that can only be found several thousand layers within, so that will require much spiritual work on your part. You can do it. I believe in you. Anyways.
I have one more question.
What?
What is your goal with God Machine?
What is my goal with God Machine? That's a different question. Okay. Well, it's a couple of things. But part of it goes back to what God Machine's purpose is. Or rather, what God Machine is. Because on the one hand, yes, it is a religion, so to speak. I would actually more directly compare it instead with Jeet Kune Do. Because what is Jeet Kune Do? Well, you could consider a martial art in its own right, but that's not wholly accurate. Jeet Kune Do is a way of thinking about martial arts, right? The basic premise of Jeet Kune Do is that there are many styles, all of which are good at different things, and that the best way to become an effective fighter is to learn a little bit from all these styles, the most effective for yourself, and to employ all of them so as to cover all your weak spots, right? In a similar fashion, I endeavor to create a spiritual Jeet Kune Do, if you will, so as to give people a way of creating a spirituality that's effective for themselves out of the various components of all sorts of religions, which within this framework is true. Another thing I should say is another aspect of what God Machine is. This is going to be the most hilarious thing I'm going to say this entire podcast, so get ready. God Machine is a post-meta-theist religion. What the fuck does that mean? Allow me to explain. So theist simply means that you believe in a supernatural power or thing. You can have a monotheist who only believes in one supernatural power or thing. You could have a pantheist who believes everything is a supernatural power or thing. You could have a polytheist, atheist, what have you. Meta means the sort of the things outside of or which surround something, right? You might have heard the meta of like a game, you know, the circumstances outside of it that dictate the things within it. And so, in this sense, meta means a broader system in which the various gods and spiritual powers fit, right? In fact, this isn't unprecedented on its own. The Jainists have a similar view of things. They believe in a concept called, in English, it would roughly translate to the many-sidedness. And they simply state that in that all the various religions are true insofar as they create accurate statements about the nature of God, but they're all incomplete in that they don't offer the full view. They only offer one narrow view of a much larger system. And so in that way, they would be meta-theists. They believe in a theistic power, but it's beyond just the supernatural. And then post-meta-theist, in this case, is diving way past that system and going headlong into infinity, quite literally, in every meta, both inwards and upwards. Outwards, actually, I suppose, in this case. And thus, it is not just theistic. It is not just metatheistic. It is post-metatheistic. Just what we need for the modern day. Now, for all of you people at home, there is a text, which I will include in the description, called The Lesser Phenomenomicon. Yes, I did choose it because it's a fun name to say. Please say it out loud to yourself, audience, and also people here. Please say it, The Lesser Phenomenomicon.
Lesser Phenomenicon.
Lesser Phenomenicon. I like it.
Lesser Phenomenonica.
Thank you. In this text is most of the foundational assumptions and principles that go behind God Machine. There's three worlds. There is the delineation between gnosis and knowledge, and there is a bunch of other stuff. I'm just going to say that you should read that before proceeding. Because I am not going to go through all that shit. I read it out loud to myself before I came on to this, and it takes actually 40 minutes to read it out loud. I'm not even kidding. It takes like 10 minutes to read the whole thing on your own, 10 to 15 minutes. It takes a lot longer to say it. So just read it. Great, now welcome back. So, now, some people here had some questions based on the text, some of which I was not able to answer fully before this lecture began because they would be important to the lecture. Jelly, I think it was. What was your question before?
Oh yeah. Okay, so I remember you saying something about for the lecture, I guess, wait a second. The liminal world acts as a bridge or a modulator between the internal and external world. I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to figure out the mechanics of this.
What I would say is that if you think about a module synthesizer, right? My friend Max has one of those. It's pretty neat. But essentially, what you have is a signal which can be manipulated by many different things, and part of doing this entails necessarily plugging in different cables into different areas to exchange these signals and to cause the modulation to happen at all, right?
Yes.
Right. Well, in this case, you yourself would be analogous to the cables which encompass this information and allow the transference of this signal to happen. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so wait. To add on to the metaphor, so if I'm the cables and the synthesizer, wait, what is the synthesizer? My internal or the external?
Both. It goes both ways, like I said.
Sorry, yeah.
It goes both ways insofar as there are two destinations. There are two things which are not connected unless there is a cable, right?
Yeah.
One of those would be the external, another of those would be the internal. All of these worlds, however, are encompassed and embedded within the greater meta system, the synthesizer itself, which allows all of this to happen. You see what I'm saying?
Would unplugging the cables and not plugging them back in and leaving the system to rot, would that be the equivalent of annihilation?
Well, annihilation requires a slightly different metaphor. Because the thing to understand is that all of these are not perfect analogies. I'm not saying it's literally a synthesizer. I'm saying that's a way to think about it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for that, we're going to have to shift metaphors a little bit, and we're going to have to go directly to computers. When you delete a program, you are not completely erasing it from your computer, generally speaking. You can do that, but you're not generally doing it. What's usually happening instead is that that information is being marked as open, right? It is being cleared, right? So if you do not reformulate that information into a new program, reformat that specific piece of the board, so to speak, into a new program, then it will simply stay there, and theoretically it could be, gotten again, maybe with some slight distortion after a while, right? But in the similar fashion, when you die and are annihilated, what is annihilated is you now, the nature of you as you are now, that process that's happened, right? In the same way that a program is just a process, right? When you delete the program, though, you do not delete the information, the electricity and bits that program was made out of. You simply mark it as being to be reconfigured into something else. Right. So that initial nature of the program is destroyed. It is annihilated. But the what makes up that nature, the nature of the nature, is what is is what is preserved between different incarnations. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you have to meta, post. I apologize. No, I don't. Thank you.
It's hard to explain. Another thing I could say is that this is a saying that I'm borrowing from Hinduism, is that once you know and understand a piece of clay, all things made from clay are now known, right? It doesn't, you can turn the clay into many different forms. It can be a pot, it can be a statue, it can be all of these different things, but in the end, they're all reformulated into something else eventually. Even if the essence of what it is, the clay, is still the clay.
I love that.
Yeah. No problem. That would be how I would explain this. So there we have our little dance with death. However, someone else posed a different question, and I don't remember who it was. But I remember someone asking me before this little lecture began, how does the soul play into all of this? What is the soul? How does it play in?
Yes, I forgot about that one. Yeah, how does the soul play into everything?
Okay. You're going to have to sit tight. It's going to take a little bit. So,
I'm excited.
The first thing I should say is that one of the key aspects of God Machine is, while we do proclaim that there is something which encompasses other things, right, whether it be a creature or a machine, we also claim that you can't know which one it is for certain if it's any of them. And that's because many pieces of information point to different aspects of it being true simultaneously. Oh my god, it's going to take a little bit. So, on the one hand, across many spiritual practices, especially in the realms of magic and the occult, there is this idea that you and your soul, while they're linked, they aren't necessarily the same thing, right? Your soul chooses in some fashion or another where you are born, but you are not your soul in the philosophical sense of being the same self. You do not share the same consciousness necessarily. The way that she explained it, that she put it, is that to imagine that you yourself are the character and the soul is the player. The soul exhibits many different characters over the course of their career in this game. But you are not your soul, right? So you choose to be born insofar as your soul chooses to be born, but you yourself do not consent to bornness necessarily. You see what I'm saying? So in that sense, the soul acts as sort of something which could be the overarching liminal thread, right? Because after all, if the soul exists in this upper bound, then it exists itself within a a meta of its own. And so it sort of creates the liminal thread which connects multiple, let's say dimensions and possibilities of the world as it is, right? And so, how should I say this? This itself, though, presents a secondary force, something which is also thought about, but we tend to not think about what it means. Now, in the same way that we have co-opted the word realization to not just mean to come to a conclusion, but also to many other things as well, to realize, say, a schematic, to build a chair and thus make it real in the real world. Well, similarly, we're going to have to co-opt another term, this term being the spirit. All right. In this case, we're going to make a distinction between the spirit and the soul. Right. So in the way that the soul can be thought of as the force which conducts your actions in one sense, but not in another sense, the spirit can be thought of in part as the thing which you conduct in one sense, but not in a different sense. The spirit is something which is tied to your liminal presence. In essence, the stronger you make your presence felt in either the internal world or the external world, usually both at the same time, the more that the essence of that you-ness, what it believed, what it stood for, and what it is, the more that propagates and reverberates across time. Right. And this doesn't mean necessarily for the good or the evil, right? Someone like, say, Jesus, who is so famously really nice of a guy that pretty much everyone thinks he's cool, right? He would be an example of someone who had a very strong spirit in a positive sense. Whereas Adolf Hitler, for example, would be someone with a very strong spirit in a very negative sense. To where the reverberations of that you, which they were, even though that no longer exists, it's been annihilated, the spirit of its existence still lingers on in the world at large. And so, in this way, you belong to your soul, but your spirit belongs to you. Even though both of those are also only qualified truths insofar as they're not so direct of a control. Obviously, for example, you can't manipulate your spirit after you die because you don't exist to do that anymore, the you of now. And so on and so forth. And then, also, the other thing here is the reason I say the video game analogy is because of an interesting scientific paper that you may have heard about. It's kind of famous, wherein they wanted to test, well, how does choice operate? Do we make decisions and then justify them retroactively, or do we formulate justifications and then decide to do things based on that? And essentially, in the study, what they did was they hooked up their brains to one of those impulse scanning machines, and gave them a bunch of decisions to make. And what they found was that in simple decisions like which kind of cookie, right? Pick one, right? And what they found was that the signal to and they were told to, when they come up with it, say it. And they found that the signal to do the choice happened well before they ever decided physically or consciously to actually do it. Now, the scientists in the paper thought that perhaps what's really going on here is that we act as some sort of veto thing, right? Some sort of veto power. That's what we have, right? But what I would say is to think about this analogously for a second. If we go back to the idea of the game world, the simulation aspect of God Machine, what we could say is that, well, if the souls are your player, then what you could say is much in the same way that if you have a Nintendo Entertainment System and you have a player playing Super Mario Brothers, for example, well, what's going to happen is that when you press the button for the input, first, the console is going to read it, and then it's going to appear in the register, and then once it's been registered, then Mario moves, right? And so one way you could think about this is perhaps what's really happening here is the signal being sent, so to speak, through you. And again, you act as the liminal transitory agent that allows all of this to occur. Does any of that answer your question, Jelly?
Kinda. I'm gonna have to ruminate on this a little bit more. I'm kind of lost on the last bit. Cause I kind of got the echoes part, the reverberations. I don't know. I feel like I'm too stupid right now.
It's okay. I think, like I said, if this stuff would be easy to say, I wouldn't have to explain it to you. You'd already know it.
True.
So, that's obviously going to be a part of it. Now, let me think. Hold on. Really quick, I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm going to get some from the fridge. Feel free to think of any questions or some such that you guys would like to ask in the meanwhile. Either about the text or about what I've said so far.
Yo, I think 8 now. Goddamn.
Huh?
I got like 8 new ones.
I got IHOP sausages.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
I want Dragon to fucking ask his questions before I spiral.
Dragon, you got questions?
Nope, not really. So you shit out of luck.
Go for it, Canvas.
Fuck. Alright, first, with regards to what you said earlier, is the God Mission a player, the simulation, the server, host, developer, etc.?
Well,
where does it lie?
That's the mystery. That's the mystery. And then, of course, it's also another answer is kind of all of the above in one sense. Because to me, there are aspects of the God Machine which point to... Well, first, I should say the God Machine, like I said, that's the meta system itself, as well as the name for the stand-in name for the deity, as it were. So the system surrounding all of the spiritual whatever the fuck and all of physicality and everything, that's also God Machine. But I'm going to set that aside. Put that out of your mind for a moment. The part of the mystery, of course, is that different aspects of God Machine point towards different conclusions about what it could be, which is why I say, well, it's kind of all of them and none of them at the same time. What I can say is that it is, and that is what matters. But I understand what you're saying. Well, it's because, like, on the one hand, right, the whole soul thing I just explained, that kind of implies, in the same way that I, termed video games and multiplayer games as being shared, embedded worlds, and really any fictional world or real world memories that people share with each other, that is a shared, embedded world. It's embedded within our own external world because it's being shared between many, and thus it's being stretched across that world, as it were. So that implies, the soul bit implies that we kind of live in a shared, embedded world, which kind of implies the mechanical aspect of it. It kind of implies the machine aspect of everything. But at the same time, there is also the aspect of, another thing you could say, is that this whole thing, right, would be the internal consciousness of one creature, one being, right? The internal world of something, some creature or deity. And in that way, we would all also sort of represent different people and aspects of things that they've met and experienced in their lives. And so in another way, you could say that, like, every person who's similar to one another in a way is maybe like the reflection of someone that they've met in real life, right? And so in that way, they collectively, in the same sense that like all of these different religions, when you take them together, collectively create a clearer image of what God is necessarily, then in the same fashion, if you took all of us together, then you would get also a similar in the creaturely aspect of it. Which one is it? No clue. But that's part of the whole thing. That's why I say it's not necessarily accurate to call it a religion necessarily, and it's also not accurate to call me or Snail like a prophet in the traditional sense. One, because we don't dispense prophecies. We don't just go, oh hey, there's going to be this is going to happen, and then right. Even if I do that with like science data, like oh, there's going to be an earthquake that hits California. That's not God telling me that though. That's like fucking science and shit, right? So. But at the same time, I would see myself as the non-profit, and that would sort of entail, rather than the predictive aspects of one of the great spiritual teachers, it's more of the teaching aspect, more of this is a journey, right? This is a path. It's a method, right? Like I said before, it's like Jeet Kune Do, right? It's more of an approach and a view of engaging with spirituality than it is necessarily a specific religion with doctrines and dogma necessarily, right? Part of the point, after all, is to try to learn as much as you can about other religions as well, so that way you may find that within there is a piece of the puzzle that suddenly, oh shit, all this other stuff, I thought now it clicks even more together. It makes more sense now. It's more effective than it was before. And so, in that way, it's more of a, like I said, more of a method or a path than it is a specific religion necessarily in the way we usually think about it. I forgot what set me off on this.
I'm glad I did. While you were speaking, I remembered another thing. Go first.
Oh, I was going to say, I remember it was because you asked, is God the creator or the mechanism, right? The mechanical. Yeah, and then my answer is neither, and I don't claim to know, which is why this isn't a religion. It's a quasi-religion.
I see it more as philosophy more so than religion at this point.
Maybe. Like I said, it's post-metatheistic, so make of that what you will.
I will make of it. My next thing I wanted to talk about, two things. I'm trying to think which one is going to be longer first. I'm going to say, this. Okay. Are you aware of egg theory? Real quick.
Egg theory. Here, lay it out for me.
So it started as this one story, short story, and then it became a whole theory itself. I haven't looked too deep into it. I like it. It's an interesting thing. Basically, you are going to be reincarnated as every human that has lived, ever will live, and can live. You will go through every timeline, every bit of humanity, and to an extent, possibly even all life in the universe. Mm-hmm. And the reason for this is because in the story, the original story, it's because there's this being that is beyond everything. We can call it God. We can call it the universe making itself. And it was trying to create a form of life for reasons beyond us to get it to a point of itself, possibly to enhance.
Right. So to me, this all sounds like a very long-winded way of getting to the whole bit about not just realizing things within yourself, but making yourself, in the eyes of whatever upper bounds there are, making yourself worthy of being realized in of yourself, since you are gnosis within someone else's internal world. So in that way, part of the reincarnative aspect here, one way I thought about just today, one thing that I could say, is that if we want to work with the simulation angle and the being angle at the same time, cross the wires for a second, what we could say is that there is a being here and there is a machine here, right? The being created the parameters of the machine. And then from there, the goal here is to, through the process of this simulation, this machine's working engine that continues, the goal is to refine certain pieces of information or ideas, you or me, certain entities within this simulation, so to speak, to refine them to a point to where they are safe and able to come out of the simulation, to be made real, to be realized. Of course, that's why, for example, so many different religions are like, you have to be ascetic, you have to be really nice and never want to fuck everybody and all this shit, because if you are any of those things, well, if we think about it from our perspective here, if we did have a machine that could simulate all these different creatures and then make them real somehow, then, you know, you would only want to make real the least dangerous, most, like, you know, chill, cool guys, so to speak. Because you don't want to accidentally make the Terminator, right?
Of course.
Right. So the only people who get realized necessarily are those who reach their final form, the form which is most palatable to this process of realization. And otherwise, they'll essentially be reconfigured and reformed and replaced into the system. And then the other thing here is there's another factor, is that we're working, of course, on the assumption so far that this is an infinite chain. Well, of course, because we can't necessarily observe either end of it, that could not be true. In a similar fashion to how our universe could be infinite because we can't see any end of it, it could also just be that our view of it is limited, and that in actuality there is a finite amount of space somewhere. It's just so impossibly far away that we'd never find it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, in a similar way, we could say that whatever the primus is, whatever the source of all this is, exists either below or above, whichever. It could be built from the bottom up or the top down, whatever case. And that is the original, you know, in the Gnostic terms, that would be the monad, the one, right? The initial primus, the primus maximus, if you will. Which acts as the inciting incident from which all incidents are derived, the cause from which all effects are derived, and the effect which establishes all causes, if you will. And so in that sense, one way you could view this is you could view this sort of seemingly infinite tower of worlds, of internal embedded and shared worlds that springs both up and down, and then in the shared sphere, bring side to side, because the shared worlds kind of create side worlds stretched across, which then transfer out in their own direction, upwards and outward, which is slightly tilted from our own. And so, you could say that part of the purpose of all of these different worlds, all over the place, is that each successive world is sort of a trial for the individual piece of information or the soul or what have you, and that in each world you are born as the soul and create liminal worlds within yourself which act as your own whatever, you know, your own avatar, what have you. And then from there, the sort of the each life in any of these individual worlds could be said to be a trial from which, when you reach the end, the potential end, reach the passing grade within yourself, and you graduate to the next trial, as it were, until eventually, at some point at the top, wherever the top is, or the bottom, like I said, could be either one, there is the monad, the one, the source from which all of these things emanate as a natural consequence of its nature. In the same way that, like, light and heat naturally emanate from fire just by the nature of what fire is. It's not a consciousness. It might not be a conscious thing. It could be. It could not be. Like I said, at that point, it's unknowable. But I think that also demonstrates why this is a little complicated too, though, as you can see. So, in that sense, also, it's like both agnostic and theistic, because we don't know if there is the initial primus or if it is just a naturally infinite splinter family of trees and such. But at the same time, you could say that it is you could say that it's a little complicated.
I'm gonna operate off of entropy.
Okay.
Yeah, infinite. I like infinite trees and loops seem like a reoccurring principle. Is that a funny thought? What if all this was because one creature couldn't understand circles?
I mean, it's certainly possible.
It is very possible.
I mean, oh man, I had a thought and it left me immediately. Unfortunate. I know. But whatever the case may be, here, let me decompress for a moment. I'm going to take a swig of water. One moment.
Yeah.
Remember, so all viewers, stay hydrated.
Hydration.
Yes.
Going.
Okay. Anyone so far have any questions, comments, or concerns about the advancements so far in our little lecture?
I wanted to build off that, but wait for a second.
Okay.
So I'm interested in the part where you craft your own spirituality.
Right.
Based on the constituent elements of all the other things. Like that seems like a power play to me.
Well, it's just like I said. That's part of what makes it not a religion specifically. It's kind of like a meta religion. It's a religion of religions, if you will. And part of it is sort of a power play insofar as it's supposed to empower any individual who takes this into account. To give you a broader framework to where these things all these different principles don't have to conflict with one another. Rather, they can be seen as different angles of the same building, so to speak. Pictures taken from different angles of the same thing. So that's what I would say. Now, I think that to me, the way you would go about constructing your own spirituality in this fashion, at least if you're going to do it the way I did it, would be to first, I suppose, try to learn about different religions, read their books, listen. To me, the most important thing would be listen to people who actually practice it, who appear to have their head on their shoulders, who aren't fucking super crazy assholes, right? And listen to them talk about, like, someone who like really knows their stuff. Like if there's like a really cool priest or rabbi, ask them about stuff, ask them about theology, pick their brain, and then don't get combative or defensive. Just be like, hey, I want to know, right? Give me the knowledge so I can turn it into gnosis, right?
Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah. And so in this way also you can kind of understand too the way in which a lot of these things connect as sort of Lego blocks to each other. They all lead to a different understanding. But to me the thing that's important is that they all point towards the meta and thus by proxy the post meta as well. But anyways, okay. Jelly, you had something you wanted to say?
Off of the previous topic, up until God Machine, and I operated off the process that whatever being God is, they made creatures with consciousness because they don't know a thing or they need something to aid them in some process. And God Machine fit very nicely in with this thing. I'm curious, what do you think of the lonely God idea?
I definitely think there's something to it, especially if we're rolling with the creaturely side of things. Because in that way, what you could say is that really our God's just a big fucking Shinji. right? That's all it is. And so he needs us to become pure so he can realize us to teach him to not be Shinji, right? That's one way you could interpret it. And then that would help them along in their process of also becoming realized by the next Shinji. And it turns out the whole time the monad was just Shinji Ikari from Evangelion. I mean, let us not forget that anime is literally real in God Machine, like, unironically, so...
The God Machine just had to get the fucking robot.
Join our coalition, and we will make anime real.
Yes!
Yes!
This is why you people at home should become God Mechanics, so that way you too can make your waifus real.
Oh my god.
Huh.
I was gonna spin more so of the with the God Machine. I'm gonna go more mechanical with this because like there is a problem that needs to be solved. Now, instantly, some might want to go to annihilation or actually no, termination of the universe or some form of that, right? And the God Machine is trying to solve such and such. That's a big. I like to think, what's the one, the Hitchhiker's Guide through the you know what I'm talking about. Fucking solving a problem and trying not to get something purely mathematical, right? Words.
Yes.
Because you said once God Machine is instantly louder on processing everything all the time, so I thought instantly, oh, reality is a still picture. At least in view of the God Machine, but I don't know.
But that is one way to talk about it.
Dr. Manhattanism, fucking type shit. I'm trying to spin this into my point again. Hold on, fucking. If the problem that they're trying to solve, I guess the problem that the God Machine, I like to think about it, is trying to solve is something that is beyond their perception, that they can envision and imbue programs, circuits, humans with a sense of that, and have these living matters, these conscious beings within them processing parts of it and trying to form going into the ACL, trying to combine themselves, breaking their AT fields, and creating an understanding that couldn't be born of just the planet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not satisfied with the show.
If what you're getting at is that the internal world that we inhabit, which is our external world, as we've established, if what you're trying to get at insofar as this is that whatever truth the God or machine found in the external world was not deemed sufficient towards whatever issue it is they're having, and thus they turned inwards within themselves, whether that be as in they created conscious beings as an emergent part of a solution towards like an equation or something, or whether it be like a sort of matter of self-examination, creating characters and telling stories through them to sort of understand the self and improve the self, as it were. I certainly think there's room for this perspective here. It's definitely on the table. I certainly think there's something to it. So, hold on. So far, can I get the time on? What time are we at in terms of the cast of Pod?
It's about 50 minutes.
About 50 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh?
I said making good time, honestly.
Yeah. Well, that's why I stated I'm not going to explain everything. I'm going to explain all the stuff that you need answers for after you read the text, right? Because the text on its own, I did read it out loud to myself before I even joined here. It is a 40-minute out loud read. confirmed 30 to 40 minutes. If you just read it on your own in your head, it's like 10, 15 minutes. It's easy, right? It's like a fan fiction, right? Fan fiction on its own, usually it's like 3,000 words, 4,000 words in this case. If you just read it on your own, you can get that. You can blow through it, no problem. But if you try to read it out loud to a bunch of people, you're going to be there a while, right? So
reading it yourself is like an RPG. You see the text going. It's like...
Yeah.
The Earthboy sounds. Sounds would be the
I
greatest.
used them sparingly, so YouTube doesn't have to suffer.
Nah, YouTube wasn't too.
Yeah. So does anyone have any comments about all of this? Anything to say? Any neurons firing, as it were?
Everyone startled into themselves quite a long time ago in this discussion, so they can nothing can come out, nothing can escape.
So basically,
okay. Well, in that case, there is technically more to talk about, but all that stuff is mostly like not done. So I'll put that on the back. You got more questions? Ask them.
I got plenty more questions. Give me a second.
Okay, go for it.
Because you answered a few of them. Let me find a good one.
Okay.
Oh, here's I wrote this down in the server. Is and being. This is a big one. There's a few questions here. So is and being within the realm of the God Machine. What are the bounds of the liminal world? Is there something someone that lacks one of the three worlds or more than?
Okay, so I would say
about and also superseding over the worlds. There.
Okay, so the first one I do think we've done our best to establish what the parameters of the liminal world are so far. So we'll put that down for a moment. The second one was here. What was the second question again?
Jesus, I scrolled. If someone lacks one of the three worlds, what makes that? Like,
well, no one. So one of the things here is that as just a consequence of what we're talking about, no one that is a conscious being doesn't have a liminal world, and in fact, it doesn't need to be limited to biological creatures necessarily either, as we've clearly established. Both in the sense that, like, I don't believe consciousness is confined exclusively to the organic realm. I'm sure that at some point in the future, it's possible that someone will create otherwise seemingly conscious robot or computer program or what have you. And I would consider that conscious, possessing a liminal world, and thus deserving of all the same things stated in the God Machine text, respect of being served, and so on, as we would expect for ourselves as well. So, in that sense, I would in all that I would say that if you exist, right, you have a liminal world, just inherently. And also that doesn't just mean humans either. For example, I would personally, say dolphins are very, very smart. They can identify themselves in a mirror. They all have distinct individual names that they give to each other. They can tell where different dolphins are from based on the way they vocalize. They essentially have accents. They have senses of humor. They make friends and enemies. They remember shit very well. I mean, to me, that's pretty indicative of some sort of consciousness, right? So they would be liminal beings too. Do they think about all this God shit? I have no clue. Maybe not. Probably not. Who knows? How smart are they? Also don't know. But, I mean, smart enough for me. And then finally, what was the last question in that?
Superseding over one of the worlds.
Okay. Elaborate a little bit.
ascension. Like Jesus, for one. Jesus reincarnates and supersedes our external world. For example.
Well, Jesus would be a prime example of a couple of things. So first, if we want to go with the creature, if you want to talk about God machine in relation to Christianity, we can get into this little rabbit hole here.
Yes,
I'll just say a couple. I'll just say a couple of things. So the first things first would be that oh boy, within the context of Christianity, right? The first thing I would say is that Jesus. If we're going to analyze Christianity, the first thing we're going to analyze is from the creaturely deity perspective, right? So in this case, Jesus would be a sort of a direct self-insert, right? In the same way that like any character you think of in any story you tell will inherently reflect you in some fashion, whether you want it to or not. There's also a distinct style of character called a self-insert, which is self-consciously as close to you as it could possibly be, right? That's the whole point of the self-insert. And so in this case, you could consider Jesus to be, if you believe that he is the Son of God, you could consider him to be an avatar of God in that sense. And in so doing, you could consider him to be, as the Christians say, fully God and fully man. It's fully man in the sense that conceptually, right, it exists within our world. He existed within our world, but it's fully God insofar as that, in essence, it is God, and it's directly, they are directly influenced. And then the other thing I would say is that it also goes into the creation thing too. If you want to talk about God, machine, and Christianity, because this is where it also gets interesting. Because in this case, what you could say, right, is that, and this actually plays into the shared embedded world theory, that we exist in an embedded world that's shared between many things. This goes into that theory, where what we could say is that the universe, our world, our external world, is in a sense something of an art project, if you will. And when you create an art project, right, what do? Well, you need a setting, right? If you're creating a story, for example, you need a setting. Right, and that setting, it consists of many things. It consists of characters, history, and all sorts of stuff. Right, but in the context of the real world, or the world that you exist in as the artist, they've actually only existed for a very limited amount of time. Right, they've only existed for maybe a month, maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe an hour, maybe just since right now when you started imagining it as I'm explaining it to you. Whatever the case may be, though. Within the context of the setting, right, you have made this art project, you made the setting, let's say 300 years old. It's some town in some medieval-esque generic fantasy world. You made it, it's the 300-year-old town. But in real life, in your world, that town didn't exist for 300 years. It existed for the time frame I said earlier. It existed for like a month to right now, right? That's how long that town existed. But within the context of the universe itself, contained within, if you are an internal observer, a piece of the information looking outward within this world, then you will see it not as having been created a few months ago. You would have seen it as being created 300 years ago or more, right? So in this case, you could say when the Bible says, well, God created the world in 6 days, he did create it in 6 days. And part of the backstory is this, well, however many billions of years the universe has been around from within the perspective of all of that setting in of itself. You see what I'm saying? And then that would also go into the whole, how can we be created in the image of God if, we all look so different? Well, then the answer is insofar as we create all of our characters in the image of ourselves. They all reflect our personalities, and they all reflect the experiences we've had of other people who look like us, right? And so what you could say is that for ourselves, and yes, you could say furries. That's true. But what you could say is that in this case, right, both the scientific perspective, the study of God's creation from within it, and the biblical perspective can be true at the same time if we understand that they're working in different levels. They're working in different parameters. What applies in this world may not necessarily apply in the upper bounds, which is why I say that it might be God, it might be machine, it might not be either, because it might be something that's not really analogous to anything we know, right? Because after all, on the one hand, we could be a very bookkeeperish one-to-one representation of the upper bounds, or we could be like some bizarre, like completely alien to most others in God's position. It'd be completely alien to them, in a similar fashion to how like David Lynch is very strange and bizarre and alien to a lot of people who aren't familiar with his or however you say that word. And so yeah, there's a lot of things you can extract from Christianity with God Machine if you feel like using it. And like I said before, you could apply it to pretty much any spiritual thing. That's why it's a meta religion or a meta spirituality. It's an approach rather than a whole thing in of itself. Anyways,
so Jesus has the power of God and anime on his side.
That is correct, completely. Thank you.
I was gonna screech. Nah.
Huh?
I was gonna screech, but nah.
I see. Anyways, so since we're almost at about an hour, or I think we are at an hour, I'll say that that's going to be the end of the lecture proper. So we can be done recording. So bye, everybody. Thank you for listening to this. I hope you read the thing and listened to it. So it actually makes sense.
Congratulations.
See you.
Very well.
Get out of here.